The face on my bedroom wall. The line bordering the other side of sanity is only the width of a shadow. All you have to do is move to a different angle to watch it disappear. I am a man of particular taste. My alarm is set at 6:28 a.m., because 6:30 doesn't give me enough time to massage the salt into my morning egg. I carry with me a list of my favorite words and check them off throughout the day to avoid redundancies. And you will never catch me throwing my clothes in a pile at the day's end, because I find it uncomfortable leaving undressed mannequins in my room. I'd oblige you not to picture some tormented scene. It's really quite a civilized way to store your outfits. I even made them plastic masks by boiling down some old toys and shaping them with a scalpel, so they look perfectly natural there. Things must be just so. If they are not so, then I am not so. My wristwatch broke once, and I didn't leave work until 3 in the morning. I physically hurt trying to tear myself away while it only read 4:52 p.m. I am telling you this because I want you to understand how orderly my routine is, and how shocked I was to see something so egregiously, check off, out of place. 3 weeks ago, I walked into my apartment and placed my hat upon the garden gnome which stood sentry at my front door. I drank a glass of water which I had left on the kitchen counter at morning to rehydrate me from my walk home. I trust the public transit as much as a toddler with a gun. Then to my bedroom, where I found them. 2 faces were mounted on the wall astride my bed, that of the bus driver, and another of Elaine who lived next door. The bus driver displayed a crafty grin, while Elaine was transfixed with the most preposterous, check-off, sneer I had ever seen in my life. She was an angel in an apron, benevolent to the bone. I've never seen her wear such a dreadful expression in all my time with her. Bet you feel silly now, the bus driver said. I beg your pardon. I was shocked, but not so shocked as to forget my manners. Not trusting the bus. How does it feel knowing I got in safe and she didn't? What happened to you, Elaine? Her twisted sneer remained static, her dead plastic eyes completely devoid of life. I touched her face, and then the face of the bus driver. Both were made of plastic, much like those on my mannequins. Peculiar to say the least, considering I never made faces to resemble either of those people. I must say I rather liked them there though. Now that they were pointed at the mannequins, the faces could keep each other company while I was gone. 2 weeks ago. Elaine is dead. I believe that's the most important fact to address first. She struck her head on a concrete pillar after tumbling down nearly 2 flights of stairs. I never saw her, but the landlady was kind enough to show me pictures she snapped with her cell phone. She shows me all the strangest things. I suppose she doesn't think I judge her because of my own eccentric tastes. She's wrong, but I wouldn't say it to her face. Elaine's grotesque sneer was identical to the mask above my bed. I believe that to be the second most important fact. I didn't volunteer this information to anyone at the time, but I am disclosing it to you because I find it easier to trust people when I am not looking them in the eye. There is another mask above my bed, although perhaps this is the most important fact of all. The smiling face of my landlady. I believe I understand why she is smiling, because the bus driver now looks absolutely terrified. What are you so scared of? I asked him, but now his expression was fixed. You'll see, the landlady said, grinning from ear to ear. 1 week ago. Her comment was germane, check off, to the news the following week. The bus was clipped by a drunk driver and sent rolling down a hillside. 2 casualties, one of which was the driver himself. I can only imagine how horrendous it would be to roll down the hill amidst a blender of falling bodies and flailing limbs. Of course, I don't have to imagine how they reacted to the situation, because I could see it plainly on the driver's face. It is with deep trepidation that I must report my latest discovery. My own face has been added to the wall, and while the landlady's mask doesn't seem the least perturbed, my own expression surpasses the most ghastly countenance of dread your darkest imagination might conjure. I tried to shift my anguished face, but the expression was hard-set and immovable. I tried heating it in the oven to make it malleable, but 2 hours at 500 degrees didn't make the slightest indentation. All it did was make the landlady giggle from above my bed. "You can't change it. You're done for." "You'll see," I replied. I went to knock upon the landlady's door. It seemed like a fairly straightforward fix. Once her real face matched the mask of terror I saw in my own, then my face would be able to smile again. She opened the door and invited me in. I let her serve me tea and introduce both of her cats in a sing-song voice as though they were the one talking. "And they call me the crazy one." I considered waiting for her back to be turned, but I had to make sure the expression really captured her impending disaster. It wasn't as easy or as pretty this way, but I knew the second I lay the knife upon the coffee table that it would pay for its trouble. I cut her in 8 places, an even number so she could rest in peace, saving the killing blow until the moment her face was the perfect contortion of distress. It seemed like an awful mess to leave for the cats, but I heard they'd take care of that sort of thing in time. Last night. Her face is still on my wall. And it's still smiling. The police arrived faster than I thought they would. That's the problem with apartments, thin walls. Always some nosy neighbor poking their nose into something that isn't their business. I supposed I should have hid the body. It's not a matter of legal repercussions, they questioned me, but didn't have any evidence in my direction. It's just that when they found the body it was doubtlessly sent to a funeral home. There they would modify the face into a more comfortable site for her open casket, which I can't imagine why a woman of her appearance would have requested before her demise. Her body was out of my hands now, and her face was still smiling. My mask, however, remained locked in its grisly scream. I don't know how long I have, but it seems like Elaine and the driver both terminated within a few days of their masks appearing. I had to act fast. I tried to make another plastic mask to match my own, but my damn hands kept shaking. That's what happens when you mess up your routine, things begin to fall apart. I couldn't get even a passable likeness of myself. The only remaining option, one I had considered, but pushed to the back of my brain as a last resort, now stood stark and alone. I took the plastic mask of my face and tossed it in the rubbish bin. Now a few shots of gin to numb the pain, now a deep breath. And in goes the knife. Skin doesn't peel back from a face nearly as cleanly as I expected. I kept getting the depth wrong, either too shallow, and only nicking myself, or too deep and cutting the underlying muscle. It took nearly 3 hours before I had removed my entire face and was able to pin the bloody mess to my bedroom wall. But skin is so much easier to adjust than plastic, and would you look at that? In no time, it was smiling. I looked over to the landlady's face, and my heart beamed with satisfaction to see her twisted terror finally appearing. One lived while the other dies. One comedy while the other tragedy, but it is the actor who decides which to wear. Next story. The wall between us. Let me tell you about my neighbor Dave. He built up his own mobile plumbing service with just his van and scavenged parts, and he works like the devil trying to compete against the big guys who service the same area. He's married to a sweet older woman named Jasmine who never had a family of her own, but she finally has one with him. He has 2 children, one able-bodied helper and one who will be stuck in a wheelchair for life. He loves them both the same. Oh, and one more thing about Dave. He voted for Trump. He didn't make a big deal out of it, he didn't even intend to tell me. I just heard it slip one day while I was bringing the trash out to the street. He's going to make America great again, you watch my words. For, maybe 8 years from now, the sun is going to rise on a brand new country. He was chatting with the mailman at the end of his driveway. And it didn't just stick me the wrong way because I'm Mexican and the president is a racist ingrown toenail in a suit. I didn't know Dave that well, we always got along fine, but never really spent time together. Just knowing he believed the hateful rhetoric spewing from that fear-mongering egoist changed my whole conception of him though. We caught each other's eye, and he looked away for a second. Like he was embarrassed. Good, he should be. But then he looked back and grinned. "You voted for him, didn't you, Eddie?" he said to me. "Nah, I was going to but something got in the way." "What's that?" he asked. "'Cause I know you're a solid guy who couldn't have been fooled by that lady harpy." "Just my conscience," I said. After that, we stopped saying hello to each other when we passed on the street. It wasn't anything hostile, not yet. We just nodded and looked away. I couldn't imagine having any common grounds with someone with such a perverted ideology, and I didn't want to have a confrontation by trying to convince him how he was wrong. He must have felt the same way and said something about it to his kids. One of them, the tall one with the baggy hoodie, I forget his name, started spray painting on his side of the brick wall between our property lines. I waited until he was gone to walk around and see what it said. "Build a wall, kill them all." Well shit. I guess I shouldn't have been so offended by that. He didn't even make it up, it was just some stupid campaign sign that was held up at some of the Trump rallies. I could feel the blood boiling in my veins though. Now anyone who drove by my house would see that right beside my front door. They'd probably think the whole neighborhood supported that cat vomit with a hairball on top. Knock knock knock. I didn't even know what I was planning to say when I knocked. I just wanted to vent some steam. Dave opened the door, and I pointed a silent finger at the wall. "Yeah," he said. He stepped out to get a better look. Then he chuckled. "Well, look at that. You gotta have a word with your kids, man. I don't want that hate speech on my wall." "Your wall? What did he mark your side to?" Dave walked up to the wall to peer over. "No, but it's right next to my house dash." "Oh, so it's not on your property. Sounds like you wouldn't even notice if we had a bigger wall." After that, we didn't even nod at each other. He sometimes gave me a little smirk, and I'd just turn away from him. I don't care if it was his property, I couldn't understand how he, a grown-ass man, could condone that kind of hate. I stopped saying hello to his wife too. She would smile and wave while watering her rose bushes, and I'd just pretend I didn't notice. The message was still on their wall, she must have known about it. If she wasn't painting over it, then that was the same thing as supporting it. That's when my kids started getting picked on in school. Rob wouldn't tell me who did it, but I knew it was those bastards next door. I saw the look Rob gave them when they all left the bus together, like prey sizing up a predator. The tall kid in the hoodie smirked, the same idiotic sneer his father had. I couldn't pick a fight with Dave until Rob actually pointed a finger. I'm always trying to get that kid to stand up for himself, but he hates fighting. It would just be my word against Dave's. But I still wanted to send him a signal that said I knew what was going on, and that I wasn't going to stand for it. I waited until night to sneak over to his yard. All the lights were off, and I didn't even use a flashlight so I know nobody saw me. I took a pair of garden clippers and chopped the heads off every rose in front of his house. As an afterthought, I stuck the clippers in the ground and wrote, "Hate begets hate." Yeah, I know it was childish, but you know what? I felt damn good about it. It serves that bitch right for raising such hateful kids. And I know I was being hateful too, but that was the point, wasn't it? To show them their actions had repercussions. They wouldn't have any proof, but they'd know it was me and that when it came to my kid, I wasn't playing around. Maybe instead I should have written hate begets hate begets hate begets hate, because it didn't end there like I was hoping. This time it was the side of my house that was spray painted. Go back to Mexico. I was livid. I knew they were racist. The moment I heard him say he voted for Trump, I knew it. They were all a bunch of racist pricks. My son was being bullied worse than ever, my mail was being ripped up and thrown around the street, and my trash was scattered back into my yard. This had to end. I waited on Dave's driveway for him to get home. He just sat in his van staring at me, so I opened the door for him. "What the hell are you doing in my driveway?" he snapped. "Go ahead. Say it. Say what you really mean," I said. "What are you talking about? Ask me what I'm doing in your country. That's what you're thinking, isn't it? That you belong here and I don't. Look man, I never said that. Your kids did, and you let them. Your president did, and you voted for him. Why don't you grow the balls to finally say it too?" He opened his mouth, then looked over my shoulder and shut it. I looked around. Rob was standing there. Dave's other kid, the one in the wheelchair, he was watching too. I could see Jasmine peeking out from behind their kitchen curtains. Dave took a deep breath. "Get inside, all of you," Dave yelled. They did. We both watched the kid in the wheelchair until he was all the way inside, then we turned on each other again. "Well? Are you going to say it to my face now?" I demanded. Dave shook his head and let out a long sigh. He looked as tired as I've ever seen him. "Look man, I would if that's what I believed, but I don't. I just want a better life for my family. I'm sorry if my kids have been misbehaving. I'm out working all the time, and they're acting out for attention. I promise it won't happen again." My fire was dying down. What could I say to that? I know Dave, hell I've known him a long time. He never did a thing I didn't respect before this political bullshit came up. I wanted to apologize too, but it felt so good for one of those Trump boys to finally admit they were wrong. I told myself I would bring him a bottle of wine or something tomorrow, and just accept this victory right now. Back inside my house, Rob was waiting for me right inside the door. "Did you win, Dad?" "Yeah, Rob. I won all right. See, what did I tell you? When you know you're in the right, you can't be afraid to stand up for yourself. You gotta fight fire with fire." "Okay, Dad. I'll remember that." It was cold outside. The wind always picked up in the early morning. I've been standing out here for an hour waiting for the firefighters to finally finish spraying down Dave's house. The kid in the wheelchair, Alex, I finally learned his name, didn't make it out. They wanted to go back in for him, but the firefighters wouldn't let them. They swept the house, but by the time they found him, he had suffocated in the smoke. They say it started around 1 a.m. last night. There were kerosene-soaked rags stuffed into the air vents, so it wasn't an accident. They were able to contain the blaze before it got over the wall between us, and it was amazing to see how different the two sides looked now. The charred beams jutted accusingly into the sky, and the ground was filthy with ash and debris. His side of the wall was blackened by the fire, but I could still faintly make out the slogan. "Build a wall, kill 'em all." The two sides of the wall really weren't so different before the fire. Now it was night and day. That's what you wanted, isn't it, Dad? You wanted to fight back. Go inside, Rob. It's too cold out here. We'll talk about it later. Hate begets hate begets. I think I'll need to bring Dave something a little stronger than wine. Next story. Everyone lives, but not everyone dies. Everybody dies. That's common knowledge. I learned it when I was 5 when my hamster met a hawk for the first, and last, time. It was my fault for taking him outside, but that only made the discovery harder. Everything dies. Everything in the history of the world, up to about 100 years ago, has died. We take that as proof that we're going to die too, although we don't know for certain until we're actually gone, and by then it's too late to know anything for certain. As long as we're still alive, it feels like there is a chance, no matter how improbable, that we are the exception. That somehow everyone else in the world will die, while we will live forever. I hope some of you just thought about Louis C.K.'s bit about everybody dying. That's what was playing on TV when Grandmother Ellis entered the room. "Don't listen to that man," she said. "Not everybody dies." Of all the objectionable things Louis C.K. jokes about, I can't believe this is the topic she chose to argue. Of course not, Granny. You're not going anywhere. There is no point in arguing with old people about absolutely anything. Even when they're wrong, they've grown accustomed to being wrong too long for the facts to keep up. "Oh, I'm going to die," she said, laboriously sitting down next to me. "When you get to 84, you can't put a roast in the oven without wondering if you'll be around to take it out. But not everybody dies. My grandfather is 143 years old. That's not possible. Was it? I've heard some people live to be ancient, but I'm pretty sure no one makes it to 143 without the devil's private medical insurance. He was born in Belgium in 1874, but he lives nearby now." "How do you know?" "He still sends me a birthday card every year. I have them up in the attic somewhere." "But how do you know he's the one sending the cards?" I pressed. "When was the last time you visited him?" "I never visit. I have nothing to say to him." That's all she would say about the subject, but my curiosity wasn't nearly satisfied. I found the birthday card in a shoebox along with 83 other cards. I think they were all hand-drawn and colored, but the older ones were warped and yellowed by time and water damage. Within each card was inscribed an address alongside this verse: "One less year for you to wait, before your sweet release. Won't you shed your mortal fate, and live with me in peace?" It sounds to me like he was offering Grandmother an escape from death. I can't imagine that he really had a cure, but I wouldn't turn down that offer if it was handed to me. Visiting old people is a chore. Visiting ancient people is an adventure. I plugged the most recent address into Google Maps, and it led me to a Victorian-era estate house on the edge of town. It looked like nobody has lived here for years. Even if the old guy was a myth, it would be fun to just poke around and have a look. I climbed up the rotting porch and knocked on the door, leaving an imprint in the dust the shape of my fist. I hope he doesn't break a hip on his way to let me in. He probably has some live-in medical staff if he's lasted this long though. When the door swung open, a tall thin man with rigid posture and a pristine suit stood before me. He was wearing an old-fashioned plague mask and black leather gloves, so I couldn't see his skin. By the way he was standing though, I figured he couldn't be that old. Hi. Does Mr. Jacob still live here?" He didn't move. One arm was held behind his back at a perfect right angle. A corpse couldn't have held more stolid composure. "He sent my grandmother this card. And like 80 other cards, one every year." I produced the birthday card, and the man snatched it like a striking snake. The card disappeared into his pocket without a glance. He turned wordlessly and entered the house, leaving the door open behind him. "Sit." The figure gestured at an elaborately embroidered armchair which the Queen of England wouldn't have looked out of place in. The whole house was absolutely magnificent, while the outside was dilapidated enough to be seen on a "We Buy Ugly Houses" poster. The interior was immaculately preserved. Dark mahogany wood panels, crystal chandelier, intricate golden light fixtures, and shelves and alcoves stuffed to bursting with all manner of exotic dolls, carvings, and trinkets. "Why did Ellis send you?" he asked. The voice had a peculiar hollow ring as it reverberated inside the mask. The words were slightly clipped, but his English was flawless. He continued to tower over me as stiff as a flagpole. My hands ran self-consciously over one another in my lap. I was tempted to admit I came on my own, but the card seemed specifically for my grandmother, and I didn't want to be turned away. Idle curiosity doesn't open nearly as many doors as blatant lies. My grandmother, Ellis, she wanted me to meet Mr. Jacobs. For her. I am Mr. Jacobs. Then, she wanted to let me decide whether to accept your offer. I didn't know what it meant, but it was just vague enough to work. He bent over me, the long nose of the mask practically scratching my skin. The slow intake of breath, was he sniffing me? I fought the urge to be sick when a wave of the thick incense within the mask washed over my face. Apparently satisfied, the man moved to sit across from me on the other side of the marble coffee table. He poured a glass of red wine from a silver decanter for me before pouring another for himself. His long body leaned back, crossing lithe legs with the dexterity of a dancer. Polished leather shoes flashing softly in the dull light. There is no way this guy is 143 years old. Drink, he said, the thick perfume billowing out of the mask. I'm not old enough to. How old are you, boy? 19, how old are you? Are you old enough to fear death, he asked. I nodded. Then you are old enough to drink. I was getting really uncomfortable at this point. My hands wouldn't sit still. Maybe I was in over my head. I was just curious, that's all. I didn't really believe he was 143 years old. If he really did have a cure for death, why wouldn't my grandmother accept it? I think there's been a mistake. I think I should be going now. I started to stand, but he was faster. He stepped directly over the coffee table and blocked me from getting out of the overstuffed chair. The perfume was intoxicating. I couldn't think straight. Whatever I tried to focus on just blurred out in my mind. All I could see was the piercing red wine taunting me from the table. The only sounds were my beating heart, and his melodic voice echoing from the mask. Is this a game to you, boy? Are you trying to play me? No, sir, Do you seek to fool me? To rob me? To take my secrets, and sell them for your own gain? I swear I only came because my head was spinning. The crystal chandelier flashed as bright as a lighthouse. The scent was overwhelming. It was all I could do just to avoid throwing up. Even if you weren't blocking me in, I don't know if I could have stood to leave. Because what? Why are you here? Why have you disturbed my home? He was shouting now, at least I think he was. My senses were so saturated with noise and light and smell. I shut my eyes tight. I pressed my hands over my ears so tightly I could feel them pop somewhere deep within my head. I don't want to die. I shouted. I could have said anything else, but that's the only thought my mind could hold on to. Then drink. My eyes were still closed, but I could feel the glass of wine being shoved into my face, spilling over my chest. I grabbed it with both hands and gulped it down like I had been lost in the desert for years. Mr. Jacobs' presence immediately lifted. He must have moved away to the other side of the coffee table again. That all-consuming perfume began to clear from the air, but I kept drinking. I didn't want to die. I don't care what happened to me in that moment. I never wanted to die. Crunch. Something hard slipped into my mouth from the bottom of the wineglass. I opened my eyes. The bottom of the glass was crawling with beetles. I tried to cough, but the one already in my mouth slipped down my throat. I could feel its legs struggling against my esophagus all the way down. Do not worry, child. Mr. Jacobs' voice was soft as a purring cat. You never will. Now go home, and do not return without your grandmother. I got up and ran. Once outside, I fell to my hands and knees and heaved on the ground. I forced my fingers down my throat, but I didn't need much help to induce the vomiting. The red wine poured out in waves, splattering all over my hands and knees. Still gasping for breath, I ran my hands through my own vomit, searching. It was all liquid. I squeezed the wet dirt with my hands. The beetle hadn't come out. I took off my shirt and pants, which were soaked in vomit, and put them in the back of my car. I drove home, trying my best to pretend nothing happened. But it was hard not to think about when I could feel the beetle crawling around in my stomach the whole way back. I don't know what that beetle I swallowed was, but it's doing something to me. The squirming sensation had abated for a while, and I figured it would be digested. I wasn't feeling as nauseous anymore, so it probably wasn't poisonous. I told myself he was just some crazy hermit who got his wrinkled old rocks off by playing tricks on people. It wasn't that my grandmother was afraid of him, she must have just known he was a fraud. I was almost home before the sharp pain in my stomach doubled me over the steering wheel. It was like an ice-cold knife trying to force its way out from the inside. I had to pull off into a gas station to wait for it to pass. The pain quickly faded into a gentle numbness, the sensation replaced by a soft tickling working its way up my chest cavity. I lifted my shirt and fought the urge to be sick again. There was a lump under my skin. And it was moving. I poked at it gingerly, and could feel the hard carapace of the beetle underneath. It must have bitten free from my stomach and begun to crawl around. I briefly considered trying to smash it, but what if I didn't kill it? What if I just made it mad and it went on a rampage inside of me? The lump wasn't moving fast, but it was persistently crawling toward my heart. I took a deep breath and felt it holding onto my ribcage as it expanded and contracted. The hospital. Now. I slowly pulled out of the gas station, trying not to turn the wheel too fast for fear of agitating the beetle. It reacted to even small movements, biting and scratching in protest. I don't care if they made me drink a whole bottle of bleach, I was getting this thing out of me. I pulled right up to the emergency room doors and left my car there. I practically had to crawl up to the desk to keep the beetle still. For every foot I made, it was wriggling a few centimeters closer to my heart. What would happen when it got there? Somebody help me! I shouted, lying down on the ground to keep it still. I stared at my reflection in the polished floor tiles, now damp with the cold sweat flowing down my face. Was I delirious? The face looking up at me couldn't be my own. I was so old. My hair was gray and patchy, my eyes sunken and hollow, and a network of lines mapped the journeys of an unlived life. I tried to touch my skin, but the jerking movement caused the beetle to bite down hard on one of my lungs. I was coughing blood when the nurses lifted me into a stretcher. I slipped in and out of consciousness after that. The nurses later told me that I kept mumbling, "I don't want to die. I want to live forever." Any allergies? No. Medications? No. Please think hard. It's rare for someone your age not to be on any medications. I glared at the doctor who perched on the end of my hospital bed. I don't know how long I've been here, but it was afternoon when I went to visit Mr. Jacobs, but now the morning sun was filling my room. I squinted against it, then back at my doctor. He looked bored and annoyed and fuzzy. I squinted again. "I'm 19 years old," I said. The events of the other day immediately came back to me, and I clutched at my chest. Ancient withered hands held loosely together by a mesh of bulbous veins gripped my hospital gown and pulled it open. I couldn't feel any lump, but, was this really me? My skin sloughed into sagging pouches around my skeletal frame. I was more than old. I was what old could only dream about. Becoming when it grew up. "Do you remember what year it is?" the doctor asked. "Don't worry if you can't. It's common with cases of delirium. It's April 13, 2017. I'm not delirious. I'm 19 years old, and was perfectly healthy yesterday. There's something inside of me which is causing this. Causing what, exactly? He was writing something down in his notepad, but he wasn't really listening. He must deal with a dozen old people every day, each more blithering and nonsensical than the last. But if they could find the beetle and reverse this. I want a full body scan. You've already been checked. It was probably nothing but heat exhaustion which caused you to feel dizzy. I'd like to keep you here through the afternoon and get you rehydrated, and then you'll be as good as ever. Is there anyone you'd like us to notify? My grandmother. He raised a skeptical eyebrow. Just give me the damn phone. Grandmother Ellis and I stared at each other. She recognized me the moment she walked in the door. She didn't say a word, just pursed her lips and sat down. She opened her handbag and began fiddling with something inside. I'm sorry. I said. This was all my fault. I should have asked her before visiting Mr. Jacobs. I should never have gone through her stuff in the attic without permission, or pretend I was supposed to accept Mr. Jacobs' offer on her behalf. She took out a hand mirror from her purse and held it up to me. I screwed my eyes shut tight. Look at what you've become. I forced myself to look. If I, the old me, had seen someone who looked like I did now, I would have made some cruel joke about old people outliving their usefulness. Now I felt like I wanted to cry, if these puffy old eyes could even do that anymore. My grandfather doesn't know how to extend life, Ellis said. He shifts it from one person to another. The only reason he has lasted this long is because he passes his years into a victim who must bear his burden in his stead. So the reason you never accepted his offer? Because I couldn't do that to someone else. One lifetime is more than enough if used properly, and 1,000 lives aren't nearly enough when used as he has done. But I only want one life, I swear, I said. And I can get it back, right? All I have to do. No. You do not have the right to give your years to anyone. But I could give them back to Mr. Jacobs. She shook her head. You will not win. He has been doing this for over 100 years. If you go back to him, he will only add to your years until you've been turned to dust. He told me not to return without you. If you accept his deal. Grandmother Ellis put her mirror away. I hated how much her hands were shaking. I'm sorry. I can't do it. Please don't leave me like this. I said. There's hardly anything left of you to leave, and she was gone. I wanted to say more, but my words caught on a dry itching in my throat. I felt like I was suffocating, and if that had been the end, would have accepted it. I'd rather die than live like this. But the itching turned into squirming, and the squirming into thrashing. I clutched at my throat, but I was helpless as the beetle crawled up my trachea and out of my mouth. It plopped down into my lap, and I held it in my hands. But these weren't my years, this wasn't my fault. If I could just pass them off to someone else, then. I'd rather die than live like this. But I'd rather live forever than either. Next story. The psychopath in my house. There's a psychopath in my house. No, he didn't break in. He sleeps in the same room as me. It's not my brother's fault, this is just who he is. If it's anyone's fault, it's my parents'. My mom left when I was 6 and my little brother was 4. She never wanted us, or at least that's what my dad said, because I don't remember her very well. Dad said she used to be a perfect student with big dreams, then she got knocked up and had to drop out of college to take care of us. He reminds us all the time that it was our fault she left, and how happy he was before we were born. That's the nice version of what he said anyway. Lots of stuff about her being an ungrateful slut who will burn in hell, but I don't think of her that way. If I was married to someone like my dad, would have run away too. My dad needed medicine to cope with her leaving. Every time he took it, he would be gone for a few days. It would be just me and my little brother in the house, and I took care of him the best I could. My dad wouldn't usually leave us with any money, but I got pretty good at hiding things under my dress at the grocery store. I thought things would change when I was 12 and found a paper bag with $1,000 in our backyard. I thought Mom had sent it, that she'd heard about how hard things were and mailed us some money. I could usually find food when I needed it badly enough, so I didn't want to waste it on things like that. It was my brother's 10th birthday coming up, and that seemed like a big deal. I hired a van and brought him and 7 kids from his class to spend the whole day at Sea World. It was so much fun I thought about never going back. My brother didn't want to run away though, and I couldn't leave him. Besides, the van driver was keeping an eye on us and said he had to bring us home or he might get fired. We should have run away though. The money hadn't come from my mom, she'd forgotten about us. That's when I found out my dad's medicine was meth, and that he'd been selling some to his friends when he dropped the money by mistake. I tried to tell him that it was my fault, but since it got spent on my brother's birthday, he got the worst of it. My brother didn't walk again for 2 years after that. He needed even more help now that he was in a wheelchair. There were more bills that weren't being paid, the electricity, the gas, even the rent sometimes. I had to be out a lot trying to find money, sometimes for days at a time when I was staking out a house to steal from. I couldn't leave my brother alone too long though. My dad would just ignore him, and if I didn't check in at least twice a day then I'd find my brother sitting in his own piss and shit. I think he could have made it to the toilet by himself if he really tried, but he just gave up caring about everything. There is one thing my brother started doing to pass the time though, although this I wish he hadn't. I noticed his growing collection of small animal skulls for a while, but I assumed they were just plastic until I saw how he was catching them. I watched him put bird seed in a 2L soda bottle with the opening cut wider. Once a squirrel crawled in, he would pull a string which slid the bottle down to cover the opening with a piece of cardboard. It would struggle frantically to get out, but when it was near the opening, its own weight would hold the bottle into place against the board. I would have congratulated him on his contraption except for what happened next. He picked up the bottle, cardboard still covering the opening, and slipped a couple razor blades inside. Then he shook the whole thing until it looked like the inside of a blender, the squirrel screaming the whole time. I took it away from him, but he just kept building little things like that. It wasn't just squirrels either, mice, small birds, even a raccoon once. After he'd killed them, he'd bite the head straight off and then spit it into a bowl of water to clean the organic matter off the skull. Please stop. God didn't make those animals just so you could torture them, I said to him. Then why did he make it so much fun? It's not just animals anymore. I found a big cardboard box out on the sidewalk near the bus stop. Inside was a bag of M&Ms, a couple comic books, and his old Game Boy Color. There was a rope tied to little hooks inside the box which led toward my house. If someone were to pull that rope, the box would close and the whole thing would be dragged down the sidewalk. I don't think he'd be strong enough to pull anyone bigger than a 6-year-old, but the school bus stopped here. I ripped the box into pieces and ran to confront him. I found him sitting on his bed. He was out of the wheelchair now, waiting with a knife in his hands. What the hell are you trying to do? Set a trap. It's not going to work, I said. Don't worry. It'll work. I destroyed it. Why are you trying to trap some kid? I'm not. I'm trying to trap you. That's when I noticed that the TV was suspended with ropes above me. He cut the cord, and it landed right on top of my head. He must have counted on that knocking me out because he was already coming at me with the knife. I was dizzy, but I managed to scramble out of the way and slam the door in his face. After that, I was too scared to go back inside the house. I called Child Protective Services and reported the meth deals my dad was doing in the home. I didn't mention what my brother has been doing, because I thought once he was out of here he'd have a chance at a fresh start. I didn't want his life to be over before it had even begun. We were both put into separate foster homes, and it's been 2 years since I've heard anything from him. That was until last night. My adoptive parents, wonderful Asian couple who couldn't have kids of their own, sat down with me at the kitchen table. They told me they had some good news. They were going to adopt my brother as well. I guess the family that took him in suffered an unfortunate accident. They didn't tell me what happened, but by the look they gave each other, it must have been gruesome. I hope he's changed. Telling people what he did will stop him from being adopted and ruin his life forever. I can't say anything until I've seen him again. If he hasn't though. Well, that's why I'm writing this. If he hasn't changed, then at least someone will know what happened, and have a shot at stopping it from happening again. Next story. How to start your own cult. Let me preface this by stating I am a firm atheist. There is no life after death, although I will go to great lengths extolling its beauty to my subjects. We do not grow older because the Reaper is always siphoning our life energy. I was not born from a dying star, and I am no prophet of the divine cosmic order. I am a nihilist. I do not believe in anything. And as much as I do not believe in the supernatural, I believe even less in mankind and their ability to govern their own lives. Do you really need proof of that? Fanatic mobs begging for their religious oppression to be protected by the government, junkies in the street surrendering their will to anything they can boil into their veins, a narcissistic idiot elected president of the United States, you get the idea. The church states, the cartels, the two-faced corporations, none of them will hesitate to manipulate the population for their own selfish purposes. The vast majority of people will always be susceptible to being manipulated, because it is so much safer and easier to be told what to think than to think for yourself. My reasoning dictates. 1. People will always be susceptible to manipulation. If you aren't manipulating them, then someone else will. 2. The manipulator will always profit at the expense of the people. That is the purpose for their influence. 3. The only way to protect people from a selfish manipulator is to become a benevolent manipulator yourself. For these reasons, in my senior year of college, I decided to start my own cult. Step 1. Identify your targets. People will not run to you unless they are already running away from something else. Now, where could I find the most fearful students? I formed 3 support clubs and put up flyers around campus. One for the socially anxious, one for those needing financial assistance, and a third for victims of sexual assault. Step 2. Amplify their fear. Ever wonder why priests scream about hell while politicians rant about terrorists and economic collapse? There is nothing like fear to get someone's attention and follow you for relief. To the socially anxious, I forced them to give speeches. I asked them embarrassing questions, put them in awkward situations, and generally ridiculed them, all in the guise of helping them gain confidence. To the financially stressed, I gave lectures about how student loans haunt people for the rest of their life. I told them how the job market is oversaturated with college degrees, and how slim their chance of employment was. I told horror stories about homeless drug addicts who graduated college but couldn't make anything of their lives. The sexual assault group was the most fun for me. No, I didn't rape them, I needed them all to trust me. I did, however, convince them that I was the only one looking out for them, that there was a rapist in every party, and down every dark alley. Step 3. Offer a solution. 3 months into the semester, I had finished establishing sufficient trust. That's when I let them in on a little secret, the reason why I'm not afraid. Wouldn't it be great if there was a safe place to go where no one would make you feel bad about being socially inept? A band of brothers who helped each other find jobs, share rooms, and reach financial success. Sisters who would hold your hand and keep you safe from all the predatory monsters in the world. I had enough people now that I was able to register my flock as a co-ed professional fraternity. I did some fundraising with the groups and managed to raise enough money to renovate an abandoned motel into my headquarters. Now that I had them all together, the fun could really begin. Step 4. Make yourself special. It's not enough for your people to need your insight. They need to need you. Now it was time to explain what made me unique. Don't force it down their throats. People don't want to be part of an organization that needs them. They want to be part of something exclusive, something that recognizes how special they know they are inside. I began by offering private counseling sessions to everyone having difficulty. To each of them, I confessed the truth about why I was helping them. You see, I wasn't human at all. I was an alien who was born in the Andromeda galaxy. My people are empaths, allowing us to sense the suffering of other sentient beings. I felt how troubled Earth was, and I came here to save humanity from themselves. They were all skeptical at first, but here's what really convinced them. I told each person in confidence that the rest of the fraternity was already indoctrinated. No one wants to be the only one left out, especially when they finally found a home which unequivocally accepts and shelters them. Step 5. Make them special. Each new member makes it that much easier to add the next, because it adds credibility and makes people more afraid of being left out. Adding the first few is the hardest part, so here is what I did. The first person I convinced was a scared freshman girl who was raped during a house party. She was ready to give anything just to feel safe. I gave her the chance to witness the ceremony, and didn't force her to commit to anything. I laid rows of candles in the basement and lined the walls with mannequins. I concealed the mannequins with thick robes, so it would appear as though most of the fraternity was already present. I used a surround sound system and a layered chanting soundtrack to make it seem like everyone was participating. By the time I was through with the ceremony, she was so afraid of being left out that she swore the oath of loyalty right on the spot. Step 6. Make it impossible to leave. This is the final, and I would argue most important, step. There is nothing as toxic to an organization as having a previous member leave and talk about it. Once I had 10 members who had undergone the ceremony, I organized them into 2 groups of 5. I gave them innocent tasks to prove their loyalty. Each one would be slightly more difficult than the last, which is important for keeping them invested. The final task to allow them full membership and protection was very simple. 4 of them must team up and kill the 5th member of the group. For each group, I chose the least loyal, most suspicious member to be killed. I told the rest that the 5th member was a traitor, that he raped one of the other members. That he was going to single-handedly destroy all we had worked to build together. They would never do it alone, but when the rest of their group was going along with it, they lost the power to think for themselves. Both groups did as they were told. It was a ritualistic sacrifice. The extra man would be tied down to a stone table. I had already drugged him, minimizing his resistance. I used his slurred speech as proof that he was possessed by an evil cosmic spirit which sought to destroy us all. I made sure each of the 4 loyal group members thrust the knife into his body at least once. After that, their conscience would bind them to me forever. If they stayed, their minds told them they were a hero. If they left, they were a murderer. Which do you think they would rather be? 1 full semester later, I have indoctrinated 54 members so far. There have been 10 deaths, soon to be an 11th. I'm not writing this as a confession. I don't expect you'll be able to find me. I'm writing this as an offer. My cult is growing, and there are different chapters springing up all around the country. We have been helpless pawns for too long, but we are learning how to play the game by their rules. When you are ready to take power into your own hands, I hope you will join me and change the world. Next story. 3 Go to sleep. 4 Wake up. I've done it. 3 years of being single, and I've finally gotten a girlfriend. Yes, she's human. No, she's not blind. No, she's not a body pillow. These are the kinds of questions my best friend Mike kept asking me. I was so excited that I wasn't even bothered. Besides, I knew he was just jealous because he'd never even been with a girl before. He's always been the bigger nerd between the two of us, like learning Elvish from Tolkien's books and chanting spells in our D&D games, hardcore nerd stuff. Neither of us are the type of guy that girls tend to hang around though. Mike and I live together, we're both video game streamers, Hearthstone and Dota 2, and we make a living off advertising and tournament winnings. I met Natasha through a Twitch chat room and she happened to live close by. Since the first day we met, we've practically been joined at the hip. We eat every meal together, shower together, even stream together. I don't remember ever being this happy. The only problem is, Mike has decided to make this all about him. He started gaining even more weight, he never goes outside, and all he does is bitch about how I never hang out with him anymore. Natasha decided the solution was for the 3 of us to go camping together in Yellowstone National Park. Mike would get some exercise, I'd get to hang out with him, and most importantly, Natasha and I wouldn't have to spend any time apart. I regret everything though. Why does everything in nature have to be so damn itchy? It turns out Natasha has a severe misunderstanding about how trails work. She must be a Skyrim player, because she thinks there is only one right way up a mountain, and that's straight up the rock cliffs. If we weren't still at that phase of dating where everything becomes an opportunity to impress each other, I would have given up and gone home. I have no idea how Mike made it, but we all decided the day was over by about 4 p.m. in the afternoon. The view was incredible. No, I'm not just talking about Natasha in her short shorts. She found a practically inaccessible rock ledge overlooking most of the park, and single-handedly hauled all our camping gear up there while Mike and I lay panting on the ground. Campfire, mores, a full blanket of stars, it was a great night. Natasha and Mike bonded over Magic the Gathering cards, which I can't believe he packed instead of a lantern, and he finally agreed to start working out and taking better care of himself so he could find a girl too. As the campfire burned down to embers, we started telling ghost stories. I told one about a man-eating Wendigo, Natasha knew a twisted story about a priest who crucified people, and Mike. I don't know where Mike stole his story from, but he claimed to have made it up on the spot. I think he was trying to impress Natasha too, but I didn't get jealous. He said it in a sing-song rhyming voice which was super creepy, and I made him write it down afterward. It went like this: I had a dream one fateful night, when day had made its run. When waking world had fled from sight, and silent moon eclipses sun. Into fitful slumber slipped, losing command of my thoughts. Nightmares around me gripped, the familiar had come to naught. I forgot what I've been taught about what cannot cause me harm. My fears abound, in safety sought, I screamed to waken in alarm. Only to find I've fallen deeper, down this darkened pit of shade. No sound escapes from silent sleeper, nor outward sign of my dismay. I saw a monster rear its head, somewhere inside of mine. On my dear memories it fed, the beast who devours time. Scything talons raking down, gaping jaws of a giant spider. I was marked as I was found, as the one outsider. Until all I could recall of life, was that I had once loved. Until that too was torn in strife, an arm severed from the glove. There upon the edge of breaking, inside of me a guide would lead. She was the love I'd be forsaking, when I opened my eyes from sleep. She took my hand and together ran, from the monster in my mind. We got so far that soon began, what I never thought to find. We lived a day, a season, then year, an entire lifetime in my head. Happy as he who has forgotten fear, of the monster I had dread. Until finally it rose from quiet, when we thought ourselves alone. We had lived lives in spite it, but our life together was on loan. The monster had us caught, trapped and helpless in a corner. With no escape I stood and fought, rather die than be a mourner. Rather lose oneself completely, than forget what I had sworn. Death before me, but I would beat he, who would dare to touch her form. I ripped the air with my 2 hands, but as the creature was not real, no blows upon the beast did land, though its talons I could feel. Blooded, broken and abused, I awaited morning's light to heal, and save me from this awful ruse, that my fortune had me sealed. She knelt above me, my lovely queen, and besought me waken from this dream. But what fate would befall her here? Would with the morning she disappear? She bore the monster in its fury, begging only that I woke. Bidding me go, though not to hurry, lest this the last time that we spoke. Sweat soaked, body shakes, I can't remember why I was sad. Throat chalked, fully awake, memories flood of the dream I had. Blood trickled down my length, and I thanked each crimson bead. They gave hope and lent me strength, that perhaps she too was freed. And there my bride lay beside me, from my dream she was released. Wearied from dreaming was she, who in the waking world found peace. I woke up to a high-pitched scream in the middle of the night. What the shit? Did a bear get into our camp? I thought we'd be safe from any of the larger wildlife because of the rock ledge. Or maybe it was a mountain lion. I was on my feet, Natasha was already unzipping our tent. Wait, it could be dangerous. Then we've got to help Mike. I couldn't fault her reasoning. I just wish she had been a little more selfish. I grabbed my cell phone to use as a flashlight, and followed her outside. I'm okay. I'm okay. Sorry, I screamed. Mike was in his boxers, standing outside his tent. You scream like a girl. What happened? I asked. He pointed inside his tent and drew the flap back. Natasha and I peered inside with him. There was a girl, or maybe a goddess, mid-20s, long auburn hair, flawless skin, but naked, lying beside Mike's empty sleeping bag. I turned away for a moment, but looked again as soon as I noticed Natasha wasn't averting her eyes. Who the hell are you? Natasha asked. The girl smiled, making no effort to cover herself. She sat upright and began smoothing out her hair. I had the dream, the same dream from that story I found, Mike said. Aha. I knew you didn't make that shit up, I said. Yeah, whatever, Mike replied. But I was dreaming about her. And the beast was there, Anne. What's your name? Where did you come from? Natasha asked. The girl stretched luxuriously, still smiling. She stood up and wrapped her arms around Mike, peering at us from over his shoulder. Where did you find that story? I asked Mike. He was frozen stiff with a mix of terror and rapture. Some book. Doesn't matter. It does matter if it's real, I said. I don't like it, Natasha said. Either tell us who you are, or get out of here. No. Mike stepped protectively in front of her. She's lost without any food, or clothes, or anything. We can't just leave her in the wilderness. You're just saying that because you think you're going to get some. I don't know why I was fighting it. I shouldn't be jealous. I had Natasha. But this just wasn't fair. I don't care, Mike said. I'm going to take her back with us and bring her to a hospital in the morning. Maybe she had a concussion or something. And until the morning? Natasha asked, crossing her arms. The girl pulled away from Mike and settled into his sleeping bag. Mike smiled sheepishly. Well, she seems comfortable here, so. You're an idiot. Natasha rolled her eyes and walked out. Over her shoulder, she added, but if the girl is real, then I wouldn't be surprised if the beast was too. Mike gave me a thumbs up. I laughed, closing the tent behind me. That was the last time I saw Mike alive. When we checked on him in the morning, his ribcage was flayed open. His heart was missing, but there was still some scraps of sinew and part of his aorta lying in a pool of blood beside the bag. The girl was gone. I threw up in the bushes. Natasha just stared at the grisly scene. "We're going home," she said, turning sharply away. "I'll start packing." "No," she said. "Let's just go. We can't leave Mike like this. It's his own damn fault. Now the girl could be anywhere, so let's go now." Natasha was already halfway down the rocky wall, but I wasn't going to run through the forest naked. I opened my tent to grab some pants, but the girl was sitting in my tent. Her naked body was covered in blood, and when she smiled, more blood squirted out from between her teeth. "Hurry up!" Natasha yelled from outside. "I swear to God, I'll leave without you." I was about to turn and run when the bloody girl finally spoke. "Help me." "Help you? After what you did to—" "It wasn't me." Her smile was gone now, and she looked on the verge of tears. "It was the beast. He's free too." If she was telling the truth, then I couldn't just leave her here. If she wasn't. There was another scream outside. "Natasha!" I leapt from the tent and ran to the place she was climbing down. Her crumbled body was lying on the ground. She must have slipped while climbing. No. There was a dark shape on top of her, like a wolf with impossibly long limbs and an elongated mouth. Natasha. But I was helpless to get to her in time. One bite was enough to snap the ribcage open. I couldn't watch what was going to happen next. I turned around, and the girl was gone. I ran, farther and faster than I ever have in my life. There were a few times when I heard something bounding through the underbrush to my side, but I didn't look. I kept running, even when my lungs felt like they were about to explode, and a stitch in my side threatened to tear me in half. I don't know whether the girl and the beast were the same, simply two halves of the same nightmare. I don't know if it's still out there, or whether it only comes when that story is read aloud. I'm going to try and find the book where Mike found the story and destroy it. Although I have to admit, I'm a little curious what else is written in those pages.